Today is September 12th, 2016. Kay Wagner and Dr. Rudy Keimowitz, a retired Gunderson hematologist, are talking by phone, as Dr. Keimowitz now resides in Austin, Texas. Dr. Keimowitz began practice with Gunderson in 1967 and retired in 2000, totaling 33 years of practice. Is that correct?
Correct.
Well, we'll start with where you grew up. I'm assuming that you grew up on the East Coast. Is that correct?
I grew up in Middletown, New York, small town, and went to the University of Vermont in Burlington, Vermont, both for undergrad, where I majored in philosophy, and medical school, from which I graduated in 1961, again at the University of Vermont, as did my younger brother, Robert, who followed in my path and who went on to an esteemed career as the Dean of George Washington University Medical School. I have just, at this late stage in my life, I have just written a manuscript of my father's story, which I'm trying to publish, at least put in archives before I pass on. The title of my manuscript of my father's story is as follows. It is Trenches, Harlem Hellfighters, POW, AWOL, Stowaway, Illegal Immigrant to the United States. The story of my father Henry's route to America. Now, much of that is on an oral history taken at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse by their oral history department in 1988 and is available online. Apparently, you go to the internet, you hit Henry Keimowitz, no middle name, Henry Keimowitz oral history, and apparently it's there.
Okay.
So my father was uneducated, young man growing up in Hungary and lived a life that really should be portrayed as a screenplay if I could find the right actor to play my father. My mother was born in this country, her family having arrived from Russia 2 or 3 years beforehand. She graduated also from Middletown High School, as I did. She was a bookkeeper. My mother and father together. Once my father was given his naturalization papers in 1945, having arrived here in 1922 illegally, started a small business, candy and soda and cigarettes, etc. My mother worked in the store handling the orders and the books. My father was on the road selling. I, as a child, worked in the store to help as a kid, and then on the trucks to deliver sodas and all. So my father was born and raised in Hungary. Yeah, my mother was born in this country. She was a citizen, as a natural-born citizen as I was. I had a brother who just recently died, who was dean of George Washington University Medical School. I was driven to be a doctor since I was a child, and always lived in fear that I couldn't get accepted to medical school and complete that dream. I did. I graduated from Vermont in '61 and did an internship and a first-year medical residency at the Upstate Medical Center in Syracuse, New York, and then did my senior residency in medicine at Boston City Hospital under Dr. Franz Joseph Fingelfinger, who had been, or at the time, or became, the editor-in-chief of the New England Journal of Medicine. I proceeded to do my hematology fellowship also at Boston City Hospital, but under Dr. William C. Maloney and Dr. Jane DeForge, also subsequently the editor-in-chief of the New England Journal of Medicine. So that was my training. I then went into the United States Army on the Berry Plan and served 1 year in Korea. I was at the 121 evacuation hospital, where I served as both intern, resident, fellow, attending, you name it, as we all did. Had a wonderful experience medically and culturally in Korea, and then came back to the States. And that's where I want to tell you about its and my relationship to the Gunderson Clinic. When I came back to the States from Korea, I knew I wanted to go into practice, but wasn't quite sure where to go. I contacted, at the time, my friend, who was a hematologist at the Mass General Hospital and who had just become a member of the Gunderson Clinic by the name of Martin Smith. I contacted him about employment. And Martin Smith wrote back and told me that I would like the Gunderson Clinic and that he needed help and offered me a position there. I proceeded to go to La Crosse to meet with him and look around. And when I came back to Denver, to Fitzsimmons Army Hospital, I happened to, at that time, run into Dr. Kermit Newcomer, who was the fellow, whatever, of Dr. Colonel Edwin Overholt. I informed both of them of what I had seen and how favorably impressed I was with the Gunderson Clinic, and that it seemed that this little place in the middle of nowhere is where I could practice both hematology and internal medicine. The story, of course, goes on. Dr. Newcomer signed on shortly after he learned about it from me, and then a year or two, Dr. Overholt joined the Gunderson Clinic after hearing about it from me. He did have a friend there that I'm sure helped him with his decision, and that was Dr. Rasmus. So I feel I've made, by coincidence, early on a major contribution to the Gunderson Clinic, because I introduced two very fine and two very important physicians to that institution, who then made their own impact, as history shows. But Martin Smith, my friend and colleague, brought me to La Crosse to begin with, led this evolution, this story. So I wanted to say that right off the bat. I was number 57. Being a non-Gunderson, I would say it would have been. In fact, I would not have joined the clinic if it had been run by some of the older Gundersons. Probably wouldn't be interested in me anyhow. But under Dr. Adolf Gunderson, who I had marked admiration and respect for, he informed me, as I'm sure he informed his parents, that they would never attract qualified physicians if they were all looked upon as salaried employees of the senior Gundersons. So thanks to Adolf Gunderson, who I guess I sort of worshipped, I felt comfortable joining the Gunderson Clinic. I also felt comfortable when Dr. Adolf told me that all that was expected of me was that I would take good care of my patients and the clinic would take good care of me. And that, to me, was a message that resonated, and he honored that as long as he was there. My relationship to other Gundersons were rather removed. I was a non-Gunderson, but I had two fortunate experiences that I think are of interest. One, Dr. Rolf Gunderson, who at the time was a pediatric oncologist there, knew of my interest in skiing and took me to my first Birkebeiner in Hayward, which I completed 15 races over the years, and introduced me to a sport and that I sort of fell into. I was a downhill skier from Vermont, but this was different. And frankly, I fell sort of under the hand of Dr. Torolf Gunderson, who's a senior Gunderson internist, also Mass General trained, who encouraged me to continue to cross-country ski. In fact, he used to poo-poo my trips out to the Rockies for my downhill skiing experiences. Dr. Gunderson was a wonderful man. He was a member of the 10th Mountain Division during the war, and was a brilliant athlete in all respects, and always treated me very nicely. And I have to say that I was the only non-Gunderson. In fact, for many years, I was the only member of the Gunderson Clinic that skied the Norwegian-American Birkebeiner. And I used to jokingly go by the name of Gunderwitz because I was there, and I felt very good doing that. I was never terribly competitive, but it taught me some lessons that I've used in my life right up to this very day about endurance and about finishing. So I always admired that. And I might say as well, my relationship with the rest of the Gundersons, which was rather minimal at best, probably no more so than any other staff member, that I was invited by the Gunderson family to deliver Dr. Torolf Gunderson's eulogy at the time of his death. And I felt honored by that and have cherished that memory to do honor to him. So that's my comment about the Gundersons and how I felt there. I was of the impression early on in my career that it was my responsibility and duty to take good care of my patients. I had no particular role model for that. I just knew what I should be doing as a clinician, and I hope completed that through my time at the Gunderson Clinic and through my time in my second or encore career, which I served at the University of Minnesota Medical Center as a certified palliative care consultant. I worked in that role at the university with patients and their families from 2003 until I recently retired in 2015, working full-time there, participating in the training of medical students, residents, fellows, and participated in the development of the palliative care fellowship at the University of Minnesota Medical Center. And that was a marvelous experience. I was blessed that I fell into that. It was all an accident. So can't tell you why it happened, but it did, and it rounded out my career, going from hematology, where I was involved in the care of critically ill patients, to officially a palliative care physician at the university, where I was the liaison with the hematology oncology transplantation group and where I continued to look after as best I could the families and the patients with a serious illness. It was a marvelous experience. That's all I can say. So I've had, as I look back, a remarkable career. I've lived to the best of times in medicine. I'm not sure I'd want to do it again the way medicine is currently going, but I'm grateful for what I had at the time. That which also I accomplished at the Gunderson Clinic, that I think was terribly important for me personally and for the Gunderson Clinic. And that was the idea that I had at the bedside from a patient that led me to do experiments on myself and a few of my colleagues, which resulted in a remarkable, unique insight that was looked upon by the people and the foremost investigators in the country, if not the world, on the use of aspirin as an antiplatelet drug for cardiovascular prophylaxis. My invention was to prove, again on myself and some of my colleagues, if I can remember their names without offending those that I can't. It was Dr. Botner and I think Dr. What's his name? Valen, and he was a dentist, nice guy. I can't remember his name now. But in any event, the five of us met every morning and rubbed this aspirin solution that I came up with a pharmacist in the hospital by the name of Gary Pulvermacher. We rubbed this solution on our skins, let it dry, put on our shirts, went off to see patients, and then we collected specimens and sent them to Dr. Desmond Fitzgerald, who at the time was at Vanderbilt University, who was doing a fellowship from his own medical school in Dublin. Dr. Fitzgerald was a part of the aspirin, what I jokingly used to refer to as the aspirin mafia. And when he was willing to do the studies on our samples, with some reluctance, because he thought it was sort of silly, called me up one day on rounds, and in his very difficult to understand Irish brogue, said to me, "Unbelievable, this is too good to be true. Don't tell anybody, because frankly, we know from our position as part of this aspirin mafia, if you will, that this is probably the biggest thing that hit aspirin therapy. Go to your clinic, tell them about it, have them hire a patent attorney, and come to Vanderbilt and do a sabbatical so we can get this going." And I went to Adolf, bless him, and I think maybe even Tex Carlson. I don't remember for sure. And I shared with them this response of Dr. Fitzgerald's. And much to my delight and relief, Adolf pursued it. We hired a patent attorney and then got the patent for that idea, and then met with a company in Germany a year or two later who were able to make an aspirin patch. And even though we had biochemical efficacy, meaning that we could demonstrate the same effect on platelet function transdermally through the skin with our solution, we didn't have FDA approval to use an aspirin patch versus oral aspirin. In study form, It would have been a huge study, a very expensive study, and understandably, no pharmaceutical company was interested in taking it on. And I must say, the German company with Lohmann Therapy Systems from Andernach, Germany, came to La Crosse, met with Dr. Adolphins and others, and signed a contract with them for us at the Gunderson Clinic with Dr. Fitzgerald and themselves as the patch makers, and to develop, to improve and develop the patch. And as the CEO, Herr Rainer Hoffmann was his name, if I remember, said that together we would put a patch on the chest of every man in Europe to prevent heart attacks. Unfortunately, many years transpired in this odyssey, which took me personally and sometimes with my wife to France, to Germany, to Italy, and most often to Ireland to pursue this project. It was surely very different from anything I had ever experienced as a clinician. But it was terribly exciting, and it was rewarding to know that I thought of this, and in spite of everybody laughing at me, poo-pooing the idea, I had the feeling that it was going to work, and it did work. So I got a patent, which is like saying, no one else in the world thought of this. We reward you with this document, this patent. Unfortunately, we got to third base. We didn't score. We couldn't commercialize on it, in spite of meeting with many big drug companies, and I did so personally. But it was a great trip, and I'm very proud of it. It was one of the outstanding episodes of my life. And again, I appreciated the experience of the support of the Gunderson Clinic. Many people felt that, and I felt as well, that if we were to commercialize on the aspirin patch, and by the way, when this hit its stride in the early 90s, and I have a collection of all sorts of newspaper articles, magazine articles from all over the country, very excited about this project. But if it had succeeded commercially, it was jokingly referred to as Gunderson's warfarin. And that had to do with, of course, the discovery of warfarin, Coumadin, at the University of Wisconsin, which was patented, which was a remarkable drug, which is still being used. And the royalties from that have essentially built the campus in the University of Wisconsin. So we never quite reached the point where the aspirin patch became Gunderson's warfarin, much to all of our disappointment, and I'm sure the board's disappointment, some of whom had reservations about backing this idea. But I think I was the first and only physician to get a patent on an idea, on a drug there. Now, I haven't followed things now for 15 years, so I have no idea what else happened. But I'm very proud of that contribution. And what else did I do? I wrote some other papers. I had the first report in the neurosurgical literature on the incidence of a process called disseminated intravascular coagulation in head trauma. And that was a case that I shared with Dr. Byron Annis. And then I had a case report in a neurology journal, which still intrigues me, in which I demonstrated with Dr. Balaji Vishwanath a reversal of Alzheimer's disease, in which I had a patient that had both multiple myeloma and dementia, and with the spouse's permission, we treated this man with chemotherapy for his myeloma, and much to our amazement, but after many preparatory studies, we demonstrated a profound improvement in this man's mental status to a point where he was able to be on his own for about 1.5 to 2 years, as long as he continued this chemotherapy for his multiple myeloma. And at the time of his death, 2 years into this, after it was decided by his wife to stop treating him, we proved through the laboratories at Duke University that this man had unequivocal Alzheimer's disease. So this was a singular case report of a man with Alzheimer's disease with another malignant disease, whose Alzheimer's dementia, again documented in the paper, you can see it, and I observed that, I took care of him. His Alzheimer's disappeared for about 2 years, and how and why that happened, whether it was a combination of all 5 drugs that we were using at the time for myeloma, or 1 or 2 or 3, we would never know. But I can share this with you. I was disappointed that my article never really stimulated much excitement. I never got a comment from anybody else about it from the literature until just this year, when I was contacted by a pediatric oncologist from the University of Washington, who was looking for a way to treat his wife who had developed Alzheimer's. And he found my paper, and based on my paper, tried to drum up enthusiasm for aggressive therapy of some sort, any sort, for patients with Alzheimer's, comparing that approach with what we did early on many years ago in the treatment of pediatric acute leukemia. So it's out there, and whether it ever comes to anything or not, God knows, but it was a dramatic case, and I've often thought there's a message there, and I hope sometime somebody can pick it up and run with it. So those were some of my recollections. I don't really think I was a member of the research committee. No, I did this all on my own off. I don't remember being a member of the research committee. Correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe it made such little impact that I don't remember it. But I remember you in the library. Mm-hmm. That's where I remember meeting you and interacting with you. I've always heralded the Gunderson Clinic's approach to the care of patients, which included at least daily rounds given by either incoming authorities or our own staff, and the encouragement for quote-unquote research, which I really didn't see a lot of, personally, frankly. That was my recollection. But teaching was terribly important, and I thought it was remarkable that this little clinic had invested so much in continued education for its staff and house staff. And my brother once from the deanship in Washington came out to the clinic to give a lecture, to visit me, of course, and commented how unusual it was and how wonderful it was. that the Gunderson Clinic turned around and used the profits, if you will, from its business side as patient care deliverer to be reinvested, not in stocks, not in bonds, not in buildings, but in the continued education of its staff. He was impressed. I've always been impressed. I've always thought it was a model that the clinic could and should be very proud of.
You received the Henry Christian Memorial Award in 1992. How meaningful was that?
I got it when I first presented my findings on transdermal aspirin. I got it at some national meeting in which on research, and I got this award, and then it was nice. I mean, it was nice that it was given a label and recognized, but it was just the beginning of that long, many-year, passion-driven effort to actually get that idea for which the award was given into a commercial patch that could be worn by people unable to tolerate oral aspirin, and yet who needed aspirin to prevent recurrent coronaries or strokes. So that was a nice little recognition at the time, but it was at the very beginning of this long journey, if you will, this long effort. So, but there were no other awards, to the best of my knowledge, ever.
Did Coumadin take the place of the transdermal patch, or did something else replace it, or is it still in use?
Oh no, Coumadin. I mean, even Hillary Clinton is on Coumadin. Coumadin is ongoing, and it had nothing. Coumadin had nothing to do with the transdermal aspirin patch. Absolutely nothing. I just drew the analogy between the success of the University of Wisconsin in commercializing Coumadin and its financial rewards for that institution to what we had all hoped, including Adolf, might be if the patch ever became a commercial item. Because if it did, it would have been a blockbuster. But it didn't. So as I said, we got to third base, we didn't score, but we gave it a good try.
What would your colleagues say that you are known for?
Well, of late, I've wondered, having heard about issues in my life that I had no control over, so I can't answer that in that regard. I've sometimes wondered. I like to think that they respected me as a good physician, as a good colleague, and I don't know what else. I had other interests that I had outside of the clinic that were very important to me in my life and remain important. And whether they knew me about from that, or not knew me, but whether that contributed to any reputation, if I can use that word, I don't know. You'd have to ask them. I was very involved in community theater. I attained the part of the Padre in The Men of La Mancha. I became the Caliph, which was the lead role in community theater production of Kismet. And I was the Mikado in the community theater production of The Mikado. I sang with the University of Wisconsin Choral Union and soloed with them. I had the good fortune of being able to do the baritone solo in the Brahms Requiem Mass, in Messiah, and in Ernest Bloch's Sacred Service under Dr. Tony Molina from the university. I proceeded to study voice, first at Viterbo and then at St. Olaf's, and gave, 3 or 4 solo recitals in lacrosse. I love to sing, and when I moved to Minneapolis, I auditioned with the Minnesota Orchestra and became part of the Minnesota Chorale. Sang with the Minnetonka Choral Society for a few years. And sorry that I can't keep singing. It was a love that I continue to have. Still trying to sing even though I can't catch my breath. And I'm singing, of course, to myself and my wife. But, I did that while at the Gunderson Clinic. So I had a life outside of my work, which rounded out my life and my career. I had 2 wonderful children that went through the lacrosse public school systems, but for reasons that I need not embellish, we were all delighted to leave lacrosse. Those are very personal issues, and frankly didn't want to go back because of those issues. But again, my experience, my life at the Gunderson Clinic was very, very good. I'm very proud of it. I may be the only physician of that era who still wears the Gunderson ring. Oh. Although I've lost so much weight, it can hardly stay on. So again, I had a good run there, and I'm always pleased and proud of my contributions and the way the clinic worked. I thought it was outstanding. I was disappointed, I must say, and gratified that you're doing what you're doing, because for 15 years I felt that I dropped off the end of the world, the earth, as far as Gundersons were concerned, other than the request for donations and a nice happy birthday note from Dr. Connolly. But it never seemed that the Gunderson Clinic appreciated the efforts of so many of us non-Gundersons and what we did with our lives, whether it was retirement to knitting or retirement to another career. And I'm glad you're doing this. I appreciate that. And I think the community who was cared for by many of us non-Gundersons might like to know what we did after we left them. I was always very grateful to them. They're lovely people, and I hope I served them well. Well, again, I was on the faculty at the University of Minnesota as a palliative care consultant, and so I had residents, medical students, fellows surrounding me all the time, and that was one of the many statements I would make to them all the time, that the best patient, that good palliative care was good medicine, that one should surround themselves with help. There's no role for a lone ranger, and that we should question the diagnoses and the approach that we were told of when we first met patients, because often, I shouldn't say more often, but often, those were inaccurate diagnoses which allowed us to change the approach to their treatment for their comfort's sake, mostly. I had a lot of things that I would say over and over again to these youngsters, because I had 48 years of experience dealing with very sick patients, and I had very strong feelings about how their care should be approached. My kids used to call me Lecture Larry, because I guess I did that at home often, but that's okay. I have no regrets about that. I just hope that those were good lectures, meaningful lectures, and that they been able to utilize them. But no, I felt very strongly. I felt I was given the opportunity, frankly, at the University of Minnesota, to, if you will, be myself, not be part of the Gunderson staff. I was no longer the primary physician on a patient with a malignant disease. I was backup in a sense that palliative care was. And I felt I felt it was an honor. I felt it was an obligation to teach these youngsters how to deal with these difficult problems, and more so, I felt the blessing of being involved in so many patients and so many of their families' lives. There were thousands, frankly, over 15 years, and I think I was blessed with that opportunity. I didn't know what palliative care was when I left the Gunderson Clinic. Never heard of it. I landed this job because they needed a doctor at the university for this palliative care program that they just started. And it seemed to them, and it seemed to me, that it sort of was like hematology, taking care of sick people. And it evolved into a program, and I know you could or should or will interview Bud Hammis, who was also terribly important in the development of this, in this area of medicine, which has, since I started in 2003, by chance, and surely not my doing, but has evolved in a major way throughout the country and is now acceptable. When I left the university and my role there as palliative care physician, and by the way, I was working there full time as of March 7th, 2015, and unfortunately, within a week or two of that date, I crashed medically and have not been able to work ever since. But what was I going to say? That before I left, and again, it was a result of the efforts of my colleagues, that patients with heart failure were required by the cardiology department to see palliative care first, by patients who were in need of kidney dialysis to see cardiology, to see palliative care first. We had, and again, the field has, and not we personally, me personally, had developed the reputation for being of help to physicians as they cared for their very sick patients. So I've had, if I may say, I've had an incredible good run, and I'm grateful for that opportunity. And I am, maybe you should say, that part of my success in dealing with difficult patients came from dealing with my Gunderson Clinic patients, and I hope I served them well as I too learned how to take care of them at difficult times in their lives. So,
is there a patient that you think about often?
Yeah, there's one. There's one, the man who is demented and whose wife gave me permission to treat him, even though it seemed far-fetched. I think of her more than I think of him, for her willingness to let me do something that had not been done before. And just as a lovely woman who loved her husband and was willing, I guess, to let somebody try something to return him to her. I don't remember their names offhand, which would be inappropriate anyhow, but I do remember her. And I remember countless other patients over the years uh, and they're just fleeting faces as you ask the questions. But
If you could change one thing in your years of practice at Gunderson, what would that be?
I don't know. I don't. I always felt as Adolf asked me, to just take good care of his patients, and I honored that. I don't know what else there is to say. I was never interested in any administrative position, any position of power, committees, all that stuff. I stayed as far away from it as I possibly could because I felt others could do it better, and it was not fulfilling to me. For me, my self-image was that of a clinician, a doctor that dealt with patients, and really nothing more. The research that I fell into over the years was gratifying. That was there, and that I could pursue it as I did as best I could. But essentially, I wouldn't change anything else. I was given the opportunity to take good care of my patients. I used to say, when I think of other leaders nowadays, and I won't go into detail, if Dr. Adolf had told us to fix bayonets and charge, I would have done so. And I wouldn't say that about other people in leadership positions today. I respected him. He was a good physician and a very good leader, and I think he saved the Gunderson Clinic, because if Sig Sr. didn't come along and respect the physicians that might be interested in coming to La Crosse from Stanford, from Boston, from New York, and that's where they came from, the Gunderson Clinic would have died. So I have the utmost respect for the leadership that he and Sig Sr., I guess it is, in opening the clinic up to those of us who are interested in a multi-specialty approach to good patient care, even though it was in the middle of nowhere. And as I once said, it was the substitution of mountains and oceans for hills and rivers. And so we learned to adapt to that. No, I don't think offhand I could really change anything. Would have changed anything. No, I never looked upon it that way.
Dr. Overholt cites in the Gunderson history book that the residency program was successful in part when the clinic started attracting specialists and subspecialists, including yourself. He continued to say in that article that they came on the basis of the residency program and wanted to teach in addition to practice medicine. Was that part of the attraction for you?
Absolutely not. There was no such thing when I came. We didn't need a residency program to attract us to the Gunderson Clinic. I can speak for myself. There wasn't a residency program. I think I can speak for Dr. Martin Smith, who came even before me. There was no residency program. Dr. Bob Green, who came from Montefiore Hospital in New York, there was no residency program going on there. So I think, yes, it was very important subsequently, but initially we came because we wanted to. We were given the opportunity and felt that we could practice good internal medicine. And the idea of a residency program was, frankly, as far from my mind. Can't speak for Smith or Green or Bill Morgan that it was anything else. The residency program became very important, and I know how much Dr. Overholt was invested in it, but it surely was not, and I emphasize was not, the issue that attracted me to the Gunderson Clinic. Frankly, it was the opportunity being given to practice my specialty as a hematologist and as an internist with what seemed to me at the time, and which was corroborated, an opportunity that was driven by honest, respectable senior leadership. So that's my answer to that statement. So.
Okay. What's the biggest advancement in hematology that you've seen over the past decade or two?
Well, first of all, I have not practiced hematology since 2000, since I retired. But from the time I became a hematologist and back in the mid-60s, I lived through the time when we could do next to nothing for our patients, to the time when we could reverse leukemia in children, when we could cure Hodgkin's disease, other lymphomas, when we began to understand the coagulation mechanism, and we could control and control bleeding problems. I lived through that. I participated, along with others, in clinical trials, and really, as I look back upon it, I have often jokingly said I had no idea why I went into hematology initially, because we couldn't do anything for our sick patients, to a time when I retired, that the field had changed so much, that we could do so much for our patients that we couldn't do back in the 60s. And the improvement continues and will continue. So I feel blessed having participated in that period of time when we went from what we couldn't do to what we could do, which was sizable. And I rejoice in that, to have lived through and participated in that evolution. Do I think they're driven by technology? Of course. Sure. I mean, but technology, of course, based on knowledge, if you will, and especially the issue of genetics, a tremendous thing. But it was, all part of the continued study of basic principles and the use of protocol studies. Very complex, but things have changed, and things have changed for the better, and I assume that they will continue. One daughter, Stephanie, works in a law firm in Denver, Colorado. Has been there for years. The other daughter, Genevieve, is a physician's assistant, internal medicine intensivist at the Brigham Women's Hospital in Boston. And my son, Joe, is a computer wizard here in Austin. Mm-hmm. Can't really tell you what he does because I don't understand the computers. But the three lovely, good kids, good children. Proud of them all. We have one grandchild, and that's in large part why we moved here, and he lives here in Austin. So I think you asked me the questions, appropriate questions. I hope I answered them honestly and fully. No, I can't think of anything else. If you think of something else, you can call me.
Okay.
And I hope this resonates with the readers, and the clinic staff. And again, I appreciate your doing this. I think it's long overdue. I appreciate this opportunity at this time in my life to share the fact that I was a member of the Gunderson Clinic for 33 years. That was my career up until my encore career at the University in Minnesota. But it was very important. And again, I congratulate you for having started this. I think, I need not give it any labels. I think it was terribly important for the readership, for the staff, for the community to appreciate that. There are a lot of us out there who did pretty good things. No Nobel Prizes as far as I know, but who lived active careers after we left, after we retired. I'm glad I left lacrosse. I never could have done these things if I stayed there, because the clinic, at the age of 65, everything was all over. So it was a blessing that I got out when I did and lived another 15 years of making, I hope, good contributions that mattered. So that's where I am, and I appreciate your call, Kay, and I give my best to folks there who remember me.